All right, everybody. Welcome to the third episode of Upwardly Mobile. We're here today talking about the weekly job topics and career topics that you should know about as you go through your week. And so today we have a couple of new topics that I want to talk about. I know we had just gone live last week to talk a little bit about the ongoing layoffs, the trends to consider for the year ahead, and a couple of smaller ideas in between. And so this week is sort of a continuation of that. And so, as the title implies, I wanted to talk first about a piece of news that came across earlier this week on Fortune magazine. It highlighted an MIT study that said that they only found that 23% of worker compensation exposed to artificial intelligence vision would be cost effective for firms looking to automate because of the large upfront costs of AI systems. And so now this actually got a really, really interesting reply from a lot of people and places that I saw online, right? It's the ongoing conversation over the doubt of what AI can do, and in response to the fear of whether AI will take all of our jobs, and all the fear that you've heard since the launch of ChatGPT last December 2022. And so you have a lot of people maybe giving a collective sigh of relief, a lot of people who are happy perhaps that AI has not yet reached a level of effectiveness that is going to impact us here in the short run. But as we all know, everything around here doesn't really exist on the short run. It's all on the long run, right? So I'm going to give you an idea of what's going on in AI these days. Obviously, I'm not an AI focused podcast. I'm an economics, job search, short form podcast. If you want the longer ones, you know where to look. Um, and basically, what I'm here to say is that, you know, as someone who's worked in B2B tech, AI is still very much early in its hype cycle. Hype cycle being defined as the business cycle that you've come to know and love if you've taken business school, where a new product enters into the market, it goes into its early adoption phase, then this trough, and then a high adoption phase. It peaks and then it goes over that peak and gets into something else afterwards, perhaps even a pivot. And what I'm saying here is that I think AI is in multiple troughs because it's such a complex technology that's trying to be applied in many different places. In terms of the context of industrial revolutions, AI brings a lot of interesting elements in that right now it's a very broad-based, wild, wild west where we're trying to figure out what AI can do, how it can do it, and how effective it can truly be. And so, what does that mean? In that right now, you're seeing all these extremely large language models, these big data sets that cover off on basically the entire internet. And you're seeing that with ChatGPT. You're seeing pushback, right? The New York Times is embroiled in a lawsuit with OpenAI, and that'll be interesting to where that goes in the future. But more so as we look into where everything's going at the moment, we also notice uh, how general everything is. I mean, you have little things like tools that look at your voice, that tools that help you write your essays better, tools that help you come up with imagery. But all of that right now is in the era of expensive AI. It costs a lot to run AI right now. Getting the necessary chips is difficult. Running what you're running is also very difficult too. And so we're at that point right now where it's way too early to be declaring that AI is at a certain point in its life right now that is not going to be impactful for us later. And as somebody who works in the industry, go take a look at my LinkedIn. Um, we're still, I would say, on the precipice of getting into the practical solution area, right? So what does that mean? Um, I'm going to take an analogy here because I think in this world of business, patterns are always repeating themselves. And what that means in this case is if you go back 10, 15 years ago, the biggest thing that was on the market at that point was cloud computing, right? So cloud computing was the uh, was the hot technology of the day. You had to be on the cloud. Cloud, it seemed like it was this really, really newfangled, fancy, complicated concept. But what was it really? The cloud was renting other people's data centers. And so, what is AI now? It's renting other people's large language models, which is a composition of agreed upon data that you use that can be automatically called upon based on a certain set of prompts. And so, what happened to cloud computing during that time? Cloud computing turned into a a world where you ended up going from these large scale clouds, right? I mean, and these still exist: Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, to a smaller extent, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, Alibaba, um, and so forth. IBM, even though they're a smaller player now. And they all went towards what I would describe as the industry model, right? You ended up having clouds that were devoted to retail, manufacturing, financial services, all with their necessary security postures and regulatory interest involved, because each of these industries, when you look in them, all have very particular needs, ways that they engage with customers, ways that they engage with users, and so forth, and really how they interact with their world. And so cloud slowly moved towards there. You had the development of software services that focused on those things specifically. And you still see that now, right? You still see software that comes out individually that's hosted on these various systems that support everything from real estate tenant management to document signing. And we're in the late stage phase of all of that at this point. Um, I think AI slowly makes its way into these software applications, and then you see that next step evolution. But what I'm trying to say here is if you've caught the drift, caught the parallel, is that we are still in that early phase of AI for everybody. It's a gold rush, it's a land grab. Everybody's trying to go in and figure stuff out. And then they're going to be on their way to uh to really specifying down what all these things do. And we're in the early phase of that, right? So I think one of the earliest things that you can see right now is something like a GitHub Copilot, where GitHub Copilot is out there helping you code. And that's an engineering use case. You could say that eventually GitHub Copilot will be an engineering cloud. And you'll have these, or engineering AI cloud. And then eventually you'll have industrial AI, you'll have manufacturing AI, financial services AI, marketing AI, educational AI. And all of these things will become much lower cost because they require smaller, large language models. They require very specific subject matter expertise. And, there will still be a need, of course, for large scale, your general stuff to get people involved. But as you get towards that smaller scale, specific industry, you're going to kind of see what's going on in tech right now with all these layoffs. You're going to see specific disruption in these individual industries. And then at that point, um, that's, I think, when you see that AI will become cheaper because you won't need as many processes to run when you're looking at a specific area versus the entire world. And then you're going to see the layoffs that come there. AI will be much cheaper. Hopefully, we maybe get over this production, or rather supply supply, lack of supply that we have, and then that's where we see those changes come. So the MIT study is early days, and I'll link it to you here in the show notes, comments, or description below. And I think that as you view that, you're going to get to a point where then it's time to be worried. And so, of course, right, the most important thing is to be worried before you are worried, or before you need to be worried. And so that still means, the things that I've said in these previous weeks. Get your skills up, network, build your community, know how you're going to pivot when you get to that point in your job hunt. And so, in short, this section, industry clouds, truly focus on what matters over there. And then, you know, early days research. It's all important. It's all important. I want to mention that too. But, it's something to consider as we go through what we go through. And so that concludes sort of the AI topic. And speaking of layoffs, we had a couple more layoffs this week. As we saw in the news earlier this week, eBay let go 9% of its staff, or 1,000 employees. Microsoft is laying nearly 2,000 employees off after its acquisition of Activision in its gaming unit. And it looks like REI is also letting people go. 350 employees, as I saw yesterday. And so, this is just a continuation of all the right sizing that we've come to know and love. It's a continuation of the layoffs that we've seen from earlier this month with Google, and I think even saw Salesforce let go a couple more, 700 more people after trying to hire 3,000 more people. And so the theme of this year is right sizing. You have layoffs every time there are mergers and acquisitions because it's a redundancy play. You don't need two accountants when you only need one who understands what's going on at the main company. You don't need multiple software engineers when you also only need one. And so those are the things that matter over there. But the thing I wanted to talk about specifically was how eBay laid their people off. And so, last a couple of weeks ago, we saw a video of a woman being laid off at Cloudflare. And so she was laid off despite being only at the company for 6 months. And she was laid off on Zoom by an HR employee, not her boss. And she filmed it all over TikTok. And it went viral because people are talking about what the best way to lay somebody off is. And so that continued this week with eBay. eBay said that those who were affected by this 9% layoff for 1,000 employees would be notified of their status in an email, and then it would happen over Zoom with an HR employee. And employees were all encouraged to work from home on January 24th so that these conversations could happen. And so, we may live in a return to office world, but we certainly live in a virtual world for layoffs and cuts, right? We've seen the conversation over the past couple months be like a lot of employers forcing their employees to come home, come to work, come into the office, because working from home is an untenable situation. But when it comes to layoffs, working from home becomes very convenient for them because it becomes this avoidable conversation for employees whom you could otherwise tell their news in person. And so this eBay layoff situation, regardless of what I feel about the business, I think I'm focused more on the employees here, is a continuation of a trend that began deep back into the pandemic. Many of you might remember Better.com. And Better.com was a mortgage company, and they were famous for wheeling a couple hundred of their employees into a Zoom room where they met their CEO, who sat there really awkwardly and told everybody who was on that video that they were no longer available in their job. And this received tremendous backlash, so much so that it went viral. And it went so bad that the CEO had to take a leave of absence because the backlash was so terrible. And so, we're no longer in that phase clearly because we focused on eBay laying people off one on one over Zoom, which I think people have learned. But, not being laid off in the same conference room is another thing. And so, this in general, too, also, I think lays out into culture. Um, Culture is something that I think a lot of companies love to talk about when the market is fantastic. Culture takes a back seat when the market is not so fantastic and you need to quote unquote right size your company. And so we're going to see a lot of this, I think, for the remainder of the year. I think it may be a new normal laying people off on Zoom just because it's the convenient thing to do. You don't have to console anybody. You don't have to have the tough conversation. You don't have to have fear of violence. You're on one side of the screen, your person's on the other side, and if they lose their mind, then they lose their mind in their own homes and they're not damaging office furniture. And that's a really, really politically incorrect way to look at it. But that's just, I think, how an VP of HR would think in the back of their mind. Low risk, just like working from home during the pandemic, you didn't have to risk people coming into the office and having to deal with traffic, but now you need them back because commercial real estate is at risk, and so those things uh, matter somehow at this point, right? So those are those are some of the things to consider with that. And so I'm sure as we go through February, we'll see more of these layoffs and right sizes, and we'll watch how cultures change and so forth. I know culture's already changed. Google talks about low morale at this point, and so that's an interesting piece when you get there. And so we'll see how these companies lay off, and it'll be a really interesting way to see whether there's actually humanity infused or not. And so that takes me to my third topic, which was also a piece of news that came out this week. The National Bureau of Economic Research stated that gross domestic product here in the United States grew 3.3% in Q4 of 2023. And once again, we avoid the elephant in the room, which is within this high interest rate environment, this low unemployment, supposedly, that we have once again avoided recession for yet another quarter. And so while the rest of the world remains on pins and needles with the United Kingdom and Argentina and all these various countries in a tough place, the United States continues to head towards its Goldilocks situation. And, you keep hearing about this soft landing where we're going to lower interest rates as inflation goes down, and we're expecting that at the middle of this year. And Americans continue to spend money like there is no tomorrow and rack up credit card debt. And I guess if you were to look at it from the top 50,000 foot view, everything's great. We're heading into a presidential year where the economy is doing well, even though President Biden's approval rating is in the high 30s, low 40s. Not great. Um, but I think one of the things that I want to mention, because Albert's List does talk to job seekers every single week, hundreds of job seekers, that there are so many individual recessions going on. And whether that's because jobs are truly hard to find, job skills are at a deficit, is all to be debated because it's really different between person to person. But I think what's notable is that, as we look at these surveys over the last couple of months, we also notice how many people who, uh, their despite the state of the economy being well, according to our three-letter, four-letter agencies, is actually not doing as well as we would probably imagine. People feel poor. We talk about this on our job search, jobs report and inflation calls every month. And you wouldn't be actually out of the ordinary if you did feel poor. That people don't have the jobs that they necessarily want, that jobs have disappeared, have been offshored, and people aren't doing well. And so, it's important to note that while celebrating the whole is fantastic and you can think that the whole is doing great, individuals still matter. And I mean, that goes back probably to the culture piece at these companies too, is that these companies don't reassign people. They merely lay them off, give them 60 days per the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, and tell them, yeah, you can go look for a job. We won't help you, but you have 60 days or you're out. And that delays, layoff situations for a little longer before they become permanent. Um, but I think it goes back to the whole thing that because all of these employment changes happen at a slower pace, it's also a lot rougher. And so it's important to pull back beyond the numbers and see the actual truth. And so I invite you to do that, and whether you're looking at new unemployment claims, whether you're looking at GDP numbers, whether you're looking at inflation readings, all of which are about to reset themselves for February. So we'll be talking about those as they come through. So, with that said, that's all I have for today. We have a couple of events this week here on Albert's List that I'd love for you to check out. Tomorrow night, we have How to Recession Proof Your Job Search for 2024. We'll be talking about how to approach your job search with the appropriate frameworks and what to know for the year ahead, as well as the Albert's List Bootcamp. That starts at 6 p.m. You're invited to come. And then we have our mock interview on Tuesday featuring an office manager, the 87th edition of this boot camp since we started at the very beginning of the pandemic, just a short, wow, 4 years ago. So yeah, we've been doing those, and so those are some of the job search topics and economic topics for this week, for which I have commentary for. If you've watched this far, thank you for listening. Hit like, hit subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.